Hello and welcome to the Mime Radio Show. I'm Karen Hoyer
And I'm James Donlin in California, and Karen, you are
in Chicago.
Chicago, and our guest is in Canada. But before we introduce that person, who I'm really excited to talk to, let's talk about Michael Diaz, our producer. What do you think, Karen?
He's great. He makes us look so good, you know.
Yeah,
So we really appreciate you, Michael,
yeah, he's behind here.
and
So
down there, or maybe
move
he's up
that
there.
thing.
Maybe he's over
So
there.
thank you, Michael, wherever you are. Today's guest is a fascinating mime and theater artist. Let me check his bio and introduce you to him. Here's a quote from the Boston Globe: a proven crowd pleaser. And they're talking about Trent Arterberry. Trent Arterberry's earliest performances in Harvard Square earned him hundreds of fans and hats full of change. By spicing up his act with sound, music, and special effects, he began to open for rock bands on college campuses. After hundreds of college appearances, and I mean probably hundreds, he was named Performing Artist of the Year by the National Association of Campus Activities. Arterberry was regularly seen on Boston television and performed on cruise ships around the world. He also toured with major recording stars such as Julio Iglesias, B.B. King, and the Kinks to venues such as Radio City Music Hall in New York. Originally performing as a silent mime artist, Arterberry now creates shows that blend his trademark physical expressiveness with comedic speaking characters and extended narratives. Over the last 12 years, Trent has directed over 20 unique shows with school children aged K to 12. And with that, let's welcome in our guest today, Trent Arterberry.
Hi, guys.
There
Hey,
you
hello,
are.
Trent. It's so nice to have you here on the show with us.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
And you're in Vancouver, right? Vancouver, BC?
I am in Victoria, or to be more specific, I am in East Souk, British Columbia, which is on Vancouver Island.
Ah,
This is
And,
interesting because
and
you go ahead.
if you don't know, Vancouver Island is a large island. It's not really related to the city of Vancouver, which is on the mainland. Vancouver Island is 10 or 20 miles off the coast of British Columbia, and it's as large as Long Island.
ah.
And I might say that this is interesting to me because I first met Trent in San Diego at the other end of the North American continent, more or less. And now he's switched gears from sunny San Diego to, what would you say, mysterious and wet and crystal blue skies occasionally, Vancouver.
Beautiful BC is what they call it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Ah.
Yeah.
Trent, are you from Canada?
I was born in Pasadena, California.
Oh,
Spent most of my first 20 years there. Got married, moved to Boston, where I lived for 25 years.
hmm.
And at the age of 47 or something, moved to British Columbia, where I've been ever since.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, so you've taken some very long trips to each home, right? Cross countries.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, one of our first questions that we always like to ask is about how artists prepare. And we were talking a little bit before we started about nerves and how nerves can be good, but how do you prepare before a performance? What do you do? And specifically, what do you say or think or do right before you step out on stage?
Well, excuse me. That's a good question. Um, as I was saying, I do get really nervous right before I go on. Not so much if I'm doing, I've probably done 5,000 school shows, so they don't make me very nervous because I know it's going to go well and it's an easy audience for me at this point anyway. But if I'm doing a show for adults or in an unfamiliar venue or something a little different, I get very nervous, and I actually deliberately don't go to the dressing room to get ready until about 10 or 15 minutes before. So I have just enough time to put on my makeup, get on my costume, exit the dressing room, cinching my belt as I'm walking, strapping on my radio mic, and arriving on stage 30 seconds before I have to go on.
And
Wow.
you've done thousands of performances, so
I've tried to figure it out, but somewhere between 6 and 10,000.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And this
Oh my
includes
goodness.
all kinds of venues, right? I mean, you started out as a street mime, right, in Boston, but then you performed with, cruise ships and theaters and probably.
So
Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
when you were first doing touring and performing for schools and colleges, and did you develop that way of getting prepared, or did you have a more elaborate routine when you were younger?
Uh, I think I think the issue when I was first starting out, I was perpetually late, and my show, my little school show, I did it in the full round,
Hmm.
which was kind of interesting, and it worked really.
Particularly for mime. Mime is often just like you need the proscenium straight on as opposed to being in
for,
the
for certain types of illusions.
yeah. Hmm.
But I did a lot of turning, and I did some toy storytelling, audience participation with the kids,
Hmm.
and you put them in a circle. I'm talking 300-400 kids in a circle around you, and everybody's close,
Hmm.
and all the energy is coming in, right? So it's very energizing if your show is adaptable for it. So it would take me 30 minutes to get set up and get my makeup on. And I was constantly arriving 20 minutes before the show time.
Now, I can relate with that. I think you and I are very similar in that way because I know, especially if I've been in performances with other actors or performers, they're always worried about me because I'll show up, especially in my more advanced age, I'll show up almost right before the show, you know,
Yeah.
go out there. It's an interesting thing.
My experience was always the difference because I was like, I had a company and I had to be the one that had to be the boss to say, pick everybody up and drive them to the gig or whatever. So
Yeah.
you,
So
Well,
you would say preparation. I mean, you're prepared. You're an excellent, very good, very very good performer. So you would this confidence of being to slip on the stage so quickly is. Did you feel always prepared though? Like, I mean, it seems to me you probably have prepared yourself really well to
I
face the public. Yeah,
I work really well under pressure,
yeah.
which is part of what makes me a good performer. So the pressure didn't bother me. And to elaborate on your original question, at a certain point, a couple of years into it, I realized it was like, why am I doing this to myself? Because I'm running around putting tape on the floor and running to the dressing room. It's like, this is ridiculous. And I started showing up on time. And now I always show up for gigs on time.
Yeah.
It's just stupid not to.
Would your experience at opening for rock and roll shows, music acts, did that have something to do with the kind of free notion of time?
No, that was later. That was later on. But let me just finish this thought before I
Yeah.
forget, which is that I thought about what I do before I go on because you've asked other people that question, and really, and someone else said this, but it's true that I kind of try to empty myself
hmm.
so that I come out in kind of a neutral place,
Hmm.
and yeah, and something about rushing around getting set up was a way of emptying myself, or
Oh,
oddly a way of not focusing on what I'm about to do on stage,
oh,
because I'm doing all this, I'm getting ready, and it's like, oh, here,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
on stage. Well, I'm going to do a show.
Oh,
And
that's kind of interesting. I like that. That's
yeah, because I really hate the, oh, geez, I got to go on in 10 minutes, I got to go on in 15, I
right.
got to go on in an hour.
Yeah. Well,
That stuff
so
drives me.
you were telling us that you've been doing a bunch of shows where you're directing kids from kindergarten through 12th grade. They're like super hyper before they go on to put on a show. It's like a manic amount of energy. How do you get them to prepare? How do you get them to learn what's best for them?
Well, uh, there's a few things I do with kids before they go on. I rehearse the heck out of them to begin
Mm-hmm.
with, so I
Mm-hmm.
prepare them as well as I can. And as I've done this, I've learned you learn something every time you do a show. Like I did a show and I realized I hadn't taught the kids to hold for laughter.
Mm.
Oh.
So it was a very funny show, and the actors just kept rolling over all the laugh lines.
Mhm.
And now, when I work with kids before they go on, at some point in the process, I actually work with them on holding for laughs, so
Ah.
they have that.
You think being a mime, I mean, we'll get more into your background and the maybe different stages of your career. You feel as a physical artist, especially as a mime, maybe without speaking at all, that's a controversy in itself. Like, can mimes speak? I mean, we'll talk about that because, I have a lot of feelings about that too. But you feel that being a mime helped you to listen better in the beginning, to that audience, that you were able to find the moments of pause and to understand how the flow was going just by the nature of the kind of performance you were doing earlier as a silent mime.
Uh, I don't know. I certainly listen to the audience, and any performer. I assume you feel even if you're doing something serious, you can feel whether or not the audience is attentive.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like in mime, of course, you're so aware of space and time, not only your own sphere that you're working in, but the audience is part of that dynamic. And it just seems logical that a mime performer would have this heightened awareness of that element of the space, meaning the public. Hence, you were more aware of their reactions and their energy. It just seemed like to me, I don't know if you ever thought about that, but it just occurred to me that could be a great training ground for actors in general, just to do mime in order to understand these things we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you, when you do your performing, like say the shows that you've done many times, um, is it very set? Are there moments for improvisation? How is your connection to the audience? Do you have a fourth wall or do you connect directly?
Oh, I connect with them. I do have a couple of shows that are sort of fourth wall shows
Mm-hmm.
that don't have any audience participation.
Mm-hmm.
But even in those shows, I occasionally break out and talk to the audience or talk to them at the end. My most recent show is called The Tightrope, and it's an autobiographical show
Mm-hmm.
talking about the first 20 years of my career and the effect it had on my first marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And my director for that show wanted me to open the show with this. The show opens with a birth routine, and then you discover that a psychiatrist has just hypnotherapy taken me back in time, to re-experience my birth.
Uh-huh.
And I had two ways of opening. One was with the psychiatrist. No. One was with me talking to the psychiatrist and then going into it. The other way was me doing, opening with the birth bit, and then you discover,
Mm-hmm.
which was the way the director wanted it. And I sort of, in media res, it sort of starts in the middle of things. And I like that. But what I missed about, I really like coming out and establishing a connection with the audience. So what I ended up doing was 2 minutes before showtime, I walk out and I say, "Hi, everybody," and the show's going to start in a minute, but I just want to tell you a funny story. And I tell a story about a comedian named Tom Parks who had to do a show in a 1,000-seat auditorium for 5 kids. And I said, "Tom, what do you do?" And he said, "Well, I jumped off the stage. I shook hands with everyone in the audience individually. And I said, there's a pizza parlor across the street. Why don't we go over there? I'll buy you pizza and tell you jokes over dinner."
That's great. I remember performing in Ireland years ago, and there were 5 people in the audience in this dreary night in a big union hall. And we all went to the pub afterwards and drank Guinness, right after the show. It was the same thing. Here's like, for example, you started as a street mime, correct? I mean, we'll talk more about that, but would you say that you were that kind of mime in the beginning, not necessarily creating a full show? Now, don't get me wrong. Well, he's laughing already. I don't want to get.
I have a James Donlan story.
Yeah. Well, I want to hear that too. But it seems to me if you're performing in Harvard Square, like your bio says, You have to be totally aware of the audience. I mean, there's no fourth wall. I mean, a street performer or the Harvard Square performer can't perform without recognition of the audience. I mean, there's that
It's improvisation.
immediately, right? I'm just thinking that that also contributed to your ability to work under pressure and to listen well, you know, based on that early experience, right? Talking for you.
Sure, sure, I suppose so. You're on a track here, James.
Yeah, well, we have a little script here we have to follow, but
You're
let
off
me
script already, so who
let me
cares?
shift gears. No, so here's the next question. What does that audience represent to you? Like, not only mean like they're kids or they're adults or they're from Edmonton, Canada or San Diego, like what that energy that's in front of you? You have any thoughts about what kind of humanity that is or what the purpose of the performer? This is pretty esoteric, philosophical stuff. I'm sorry, this is the way I think. So I'm just probing. I mean, do you have any notion about that dynamic and what that group represents for you as the performer?
I guess it probably depends on how receptive or how hostile they are.
Yeah.
So I don't have a strong sense of who the audience is usually. I mean, oftentimes it's a group of kids. Sometimes it's adults. Sometimes it's a group of salesmen or executives. I mean, I've done shows like that in front of
Right.
computer people or.
So in other words, are you there to inform, entertain, educate, massage, confuse, confront, challenge, and generally, or was it all of that, depending on?
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I got to ask this one question because I know it's jumping ahead, but I want to hear a disaster story about your experience in rock and roll. Like, I want to know what was the craziest thing that happened when you were in that situation that you can think of. I'm going to get that off of my chest right now because.
Well, maybe since I don't know about that part of your career, maybe you can let us know, like, how did that come about that you, as a mime, were doing an opening act for a rock concert? How did that happen?
Good question, Karen. Back in the day, I started in San Diego. My first teacher was Don McLeod, and Don was the real rock and roll mime. He had a whole rock band behind him.
Oh.
And he had a wonderful piece called Satan's Creation, which was a 45-minute piece backed by rock music, and it was about the evolution of the world and the ultimate destruction of the world.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. It was the first part of his show was a series of vignettes, and anyway, I saw a mime at Mesa College named Claude Saint Denis. Claude Saint Denis, probably, and I was 20 years old or something, and I was amazed and thought
I saw the same guy. I think at Humboldt State, actually.
Yeah,
the same guy. It was like a 2 o'clock afternoon Sunday show.
With his daughter. Was his daughter there?
No, but this guy, that was the guy from Canada. He's from Canada, correct?
Yeah, Quebec. Skinny guy, little skinny guy.
Yeah, he had white face. I mean, it was a very Marceau look.
Classic mime. Anyway, it was a good show, and I went home and I thought, I'm going to figure these things. I'm going to figure out some of these tricks, right? And I thought I'm going to do a lean, and I'm going, okay, well, let's see. You lock the elbow in place. I get that, but something's wrong here. And then I have to drop my chest. Elbow in place, drop my chest, and then I've got a lean, right? Anyway, I met Don McLeod at a party, and I showed him this move, and he goes, hey, that's pretty good. Come down to the park with me on Sunday. I'll let you hold my titles.
Oh.
So I did. I held his titles for his pieces, and then he said, you could help me in this cowboy. We could do a cowboy routine together. I'll be the good guy, you'll be the bad guy, and so forth.
By the way, just explain to the audience like some of the younger people that might be watching this, they don't know what you mean by titles.
Titles. So in the classic
tradition,
in the classic Marceau tradition, each sketch, each number, each piece is introduced with a placard or a banner or whatever that has the title of the sketch written on it, like The Park or Bip the Elephant Tamer, etc. So those are the titles. So Don McLeod. What was your original question? It was about how I got into rock and roll
Yes, that's
Yeah.
it.
Then we'll talk about disaster or interesting.
and disaster experiences. So I moved to Boston, and I had a buddy who knew a buddy who got an album contract, a musician named John Poussette Dart, and he said, "Hey, would you come down and pose for my album cover?"
There it is.
And that is the cover. And I have to tell you that photo was done on Walden Pond in January. I'm standing
Oh,
on the
yeah.
pond, snow and ice at my feet. It was sub-zero temperatures, and I'm wearing nylon leotards and tights.
Yeah.
It was freezing cold, but you can tell by the manic look on my face that we got a really striking album cover.
Oh yeah,
That's
and
what- that was
I
your-
remembered that cover, and when I found out it was you, I was like, I was amazed. I was like,
Yeah.
I thought that was just somebody putting on makeup and posing, but
Yeah.
it's a
And
real.
this is before you really got into the mainstream of performance. So this is like very early.
I was doing school shows.
Okay.
I was making a meager living doing school shows in Boston.
Yeah.
But then I got this opportunity to do this album cover, and John asked me to open up his act. I started opening up his show at various nightclubs in Cambridge,
Uh-huh.
and then his agent came to me and said, "Hey, I could get you some bigger gigs on college campuses." So all of a sudden, I was opening up for bigger acts on college campuses.
The 70s, correct? I mean, we're talking in the decade of the 70s.
This was in like 75.
It's interesting. Before we leave Claude Saint Denis, I saw that Shame show, I think, and I was a jock at that time. I wasn't in theater or anything. And I went to that show for, I don't know why. And I remember saying, just like you, I remember saying, I think I can do that.
Yeah.
And then that's how it all started. So maybe this Claude is the father of North American Mind. I don't know. It's like,
Well, it's funny. It's funny how you get influenced and influence other people
Yeah.
as you go along. It's
I'll never forget that. I remember going like, I can do that. And I wasn't even in theater at that time. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's how I got started. I learned a lot from Don, and while I was at Mesa College, I saw another mime troupe perform there, and it was James Donlin and Tony Francesconi.
Yeah. Bob Francisco.
Bob.
Yeah.
Bob Francesconi, and it was a great show. And it's
You were a
funny.
student there. You were a student. I didn't realize you were a student there. Yeah.
I was a student there. It was the early '70s, and
Yeah.
I was about to get drafted, and I jumped into junior college to avoid doing that.
It would have been around 72, like 72, somewhere around there.
Yeah, it's when they came out with the draft,
Yeah.
the lottery. My birthday came up as number 6 in the lottery. So,
Mine was number 356. So,
oh yeah, okay.
wow.
Yeah.
So you had to jump into school. Yeah. Wow. But you never were drafted.
I was not drafted. I went to a pre-induction physical, and I convinced the guy that I was unsuitable.
Yeah.
And then a year later, I fell off the side of a building, shattered my right heel bone, and permanently disabled myself.
Well, we have a lot of similar stories. We'll talk about that another time. But, all right. So you
you
were
wanted a
entering this
disaster.
rocket.
Wait,
Yeah.
James, you wanted a disaster story.
Yeah.
So
Well,
in
that's
all
what I'm leading
in
to.
your touring, anything
you-
horrible that happened?
You're entering this rock and roll world, and then which we all have experienced, at least our generation. So what was that like? And tell us like a particular event maybe that strikes in your mind of something that was a really cool and weird experience that you might have had.
Well, okay. This was a little later, but at a certain point, I had a manager, and he said, "Okay, we're going to New York, and we're going to go talk to Saturday Night Live, and we're going to have to figure out how to get in the building." And I said, "Well, let's do a mimeogram." and I had some graphic arts skills, and I made up a mimeogram form. And so we go down there, we drive down there, Rockefeller Center, and I'm putting on my white face and all of this stuff. And we talk our way in through the door. They call upstairs, say, yeah, we got a some kind of mimeogram for Saturday Night Live. And they let us in.
Wow.
And we go up, and Bill Murray came over and said, hey, you got something for me? And I kind of shoot him away. Unfortunately, I should have talked to him. And then we get ushered into the office, and I'm kind of doing the robot, and I hand her my press kit, and my manager's talking to her, and he says, yeah, you can see him tonight. He's opening for Graham Parker at the Copacabana. So Graham Parker and the Rumor. Graham Parker was, I guess he was kind of a punk rock musician. Not a lot of people know him, but he made some pretty seminal music. I mean, he influenced a lot of people. Anyway, I'm at the Copa, and I'm getting ready to go on, and my manager says, "Oh, by the way, when everyone comes through the door, he says they're giving noisemakers to everybody at the door." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, and when they sit down, everyone has to buy 2 drinks." What? So all I have to do is go out and entertain a half-drunk punk rock crowd from New York, armed with noisemakers, with my silent mime show.
Wow.
So I get out there, do what I can. The audience ignores me, and I realize that I'm never going to be on Saturday Night Live.
Was your early work mostly like just image driven, like I don't want to say sight gags, but was, knowing how powerful illusion mime can be, was the earlier work that you did like in Harvard Square and maybe, for these rock and roll bands, was it just these kind of really graphic, physical, illusions that got the audience primed for the music?
Well, yeah, my early work was simple, Mime in the Box, The Apple and the Worm, that kind of stuff. I had the pleasure of seeing Keith Berger in Boston one day. He came up and did an impromptu thing in the park, which I miraculously was there for. And yeah. I watched him do his incredible robot illusion, and ended up bringing him home and giving him dinner. But after that, I started working on a robot illusion myself and got pretty good at it. And so that became a signature part of my show.
Did you ever watch Robert Shields? Were you ever able to watch him back in those days?
No, I did not. I did see Robert Shields once. We were traveling around the country, it was a couple decades ago, and he and his wife were performing in Reno. And I said to my wife, "Listen, I'm going to go to this show. You go on to California. I'll catch a bus tomorrow." So I watched their show, and I went backstage, and he was all keyed up, I guess, because he kept me in his dressing room for 4 hours, and we talked shop for about 4 hours, and that was really fun.
So would you say that this early work that you're describing, did that prepare you for the shift into more? I just heard the form. I heard the form. Someone just described. Let me start. I have a student that's a popper and locker, like a hip hop, street dancer kind of person in San Francisco. And in her bio, she says, "Study with me, James Allen, the long form mime," she said. Okay. So I guess I'm a long form mime. So I guess what I'm saying is, you were slowly shifting into a more long form, in other words, more storytelling, and less, visual pyrotechnics, into more theatrical kind of performance. When did that happen? What prompted you to do that?
Well, I've seen a number of mimes or clowns who've done shows that, had an overarching narrative over a 60 or 90-minute period, and always thought that was just great. But I had no idea how to do it myself. I've always been more of a sketch artist, but it was kind of a goal in my mind, and I made some really futile stabs at it a few times. Finally, I was talking to a psychic, actually, and she said, "Well, tell the story of your life." And I thought, oh, okay. Not an entirely original idea, but not a bad one. So in 1998, I put together a show called Mime Out Loud, and I talked and well, it was autobiographical, and I talked in between the sketches and used the sketches to illustrate the things I was talking about, and so forth. I got terrific. That was my first Fringe performance in '98 in the Victoria Fringe Festival. I got terrific reviews, and I took the show to Vancouver the following year and got creamed by the press.
Right?
I was gonna try to pull out the review. I wanted to read it to you. It's just the worst review ever.
That's a disaster story. Yeah.
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 But what gave you the freedom to shift into verbal? I mean, I'm the same man. My career is very close to what you're describing, and too, just how you've made this leap from silent, kind of really highly technical physical things into more verbal explanation at times, but yet there's still a physical base, correct?
Yeah. I have to say I'm a better mime or mover than I am an actor, but I'm okay. I pull it off. I should clarify for you that Don McLeod would wear whiteface and verbally introduce his sketches.
Yeah.
And although that seemed a bit odd, I did the same thing. And with my kids shows had lots of talking and lots of mime pieces. But so I was talking early on. When I started playing colleges, I went to a silent show, and I did that for about 10 years. But in '83, I did a TV piece where I impersonated the different shows and the viewer watching them, and I used sound effects. And I saw a juggler at a big convention. This was about '83, and he had this. He was doing his juggling, and he's talking to the audience, and he walks off the stage into the audience of like 500 people, and he's talking and juggling in the audience, and you can hear him mic'd. And I thought, oh my God, that's incredible. So I went and bought myself a radio mic. I think, I can't verify this, but I think I'm probably the first mime in the world to own his own radio mic.
But you're a natural. I mean, you're self-deprecating about your acting ability, but you're a natural storyteller. That's like this, not just your physical storytelling, but your verbal storytelling is the way you relate to audience is very friendly and open. I've only seen you on video, but that's what I get the sense of. It's nice.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. So then, James, I did this verbal show in '98, and I got killed in '99. I didn't play another Fringe for 12 years.
Oh my!
But in 2010, after everything crashed, after the financial crisis, I thought I got to make something new. So I created a show called The Secret Life of Walter Manny. And it was, I didn't even know what I was, I just thought, I got to do a new kids show. And I thought, okay, what would kids, I built it from, I built it from the wrong direction probably. But I just thought about, okay, what would kids like? Well, they'd like a secret agent scene. They'd like an underwater scene. They'd like a cops and robbers scene. They'd like this. And I thought, how am I going to fit all this together? And then I thought, Walter Mitty. I can use Walter Mitty. So the Secret Life of Walter Manny is the story is Walter Mitty is a 10-year-old boy.
Ah, yeah.
And that had lots of language, and that was the first show where I played like 6 different characters with the voices, and that 45 minutes straight. It's a play. It's a physical theater play.
So did you have, in your early days, did you have rules, so-called, I'm thinking of myself too, that you couldn't speak or you couldn't do this? And did you have just because of maybe what you'd been exposed to or seen, did you have rules? But now you've broken whatever rules you had, or maybe you never did have rules, but it seems that you're a very eclectic performer with a physical base. But was that a hard shift for you from the more pure mime to the more adventurous kind of performance? Was that a tough decision, or was it just something that you gravitated toward?
It wasn't hard for me, but I remember being at one showcase when I was doing the TV with the sound effects, and this agent that I knew came up to me and he goes, "Do you like all the yap?" do you really like all that yap? like like shut up and just do a mime show, right? So I don't know. I always felt that mime was it's a very constrained art form.
How so? How do you mean that? Excuse me.
How so?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you can't talk, and and you can't use any props, and you know, all you've got is your body to work with.
Right. Right.
Remember, this is an
And
education.
oftentimes
Yes.
you don't have anyone else on stage with you.
Right. Right.
Right.
So go on.
Remember, this is
So
an educational show. We're trying to educate people about the beauty of mime. So, you know, a lot of people don't think about stuff like this. So that's why we're
Yeah,
at.
and on the other hand, there's a lot of people, certain teachers that say you have to do it like this. It has to be
uh,
silent, or it has to be with the makeup, or it has to be, like rules. I don't know.
sure, I understand what you're saying, and you know, it reminds me. I know you interviewed Daniel Stein.
Mhm.
Right.
You posted. I haven't watched that yet, but I thought Daniel Stein. I took a 3-week workshop with Daniel Stein a decade or two ago, and it was wonderful. He's a wonderful teacher, and his attitude about corporeal mime was so refreshing and wonderful. And he was just kind of like, you know, all these guys have it wrong. I don't think Der Crew wanted people to be quiet, and I don't think Der Crew wanted people to be serious. He liked humor. I mean, he was interested in expanding the art form, not limiting it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, some of the other people we've interviewed, like Leonard Pitt, who's going to come up, they have the same thing. You know, they were kind of liberated by the crew. Interestingly enough, you know, they
Yeah,
could see beyond the structure. You know, the obvious structures.
Well,
right.
it's partly also you can't really make your teacher into a guru. I mean, you have to learn from the teacher, but you don't have to like come up with like this is the formula or this is exactly the way the teacher taught me. I have to stay here. You have to become yourself as an artist. You have to be creative.
Well, you do, and if you're trying to expand the art form or do something unique or different, you've got to do something out of the ordinary. I mean, I'm not the most creative person in the world, but I've used puppets with my show, and I
Why would you say
I,
that? Wait a minute. Why would you say you're not the most creative? It seems like you're one of the few in the world who's made their total working career has been as a mime,
I know, amazing.
physical theater art. So why do you say you're not creative? That seems crazy to me. I'm going to give you your due, you know? So,
Well, thank you. You know, this isn't really very important, but I'm just really not that creative. I'm a really good problem solver,
oh, okay.
and for me, I say, okay, this isn't working in my show, or I need something in my show that would do this, and then I can kind of solve that problem.
Yeah, but
But
that is sort of the creative process. You set yourself up for with a problem and you try to solve the problem, and that's creative thinking. And then if you push yourself and to take some risks, that's another part of creativity. Let's just ask you this: how, when you have this idea to do a show, and one thing that you described, like with the Walter Manny show, you say, I have all these different things that I know kids will like, and that's how to. Is that a usual way that you approach creating a new show? What's your creative process?
well, um, those shows in 2010 and 2011, I made two shows. One was called My Impractical Life, and the other one was Walter Manny. The first show was geared to the, the first show. I hired a writer,
Oh, mm-hmm,
and because I really didn't know how to write an hour-long show,
mm-hmm.
so I hired a writer and a director. Greg Goldston directed it,
Oh, uh-huh.
and we Greg and I. Rob Wypond was the writer, and he gave us the script, and we worked on it, and a lot of back. That was the first. Then in the following year, I thought, okay, I think I can write a show now. I saw how he did it, so I'm going to give it a try. So that's how I started with Walter Manny, and Uh, I, get- I kind of don't know how to answer your question. I don't really have a process. I should probably say, I don't write a new show every year. Not
Yeah.
near. I was trying to calculate the other day. Maybe I've created 8 shows over 50 years. So it's probably 5 or 6 years between me making a new show.
Well, and also I sympathize with you trying to struggle to say, well, how did I do that? Because I know with the shows that I've created, I look back and I say I want to start something new. I was like, well, how did I do it last time? And I have no, it's like something happened, something led to something else, and I really can't go backwards and figure out
Yeah,
how it happened.
yeah, yeah.
So the creative process is very interesting to me, but it's different for each person, and it seems like it's different each time you try to do something.
I can be creative, but I have to really clear the space for it. Like I'm a detail guy. I'm not a big picture guy. I'm a
Mhm.
detail guy, and I have to get all my bills paid. I have to get my emails answered. I have to clean my desk. I have to do everything that's going to take me away from it, and then I have to block out the time, the space, and then I have to daydream. And then I'm at a point where I can just kind of let go and think about, okay, what could I do? What would be interesting? Right, and then I have to write. I mean, back in the day, I used to go into the studio and stand in front of the mirror and say, "Okay, create something." That never worked. But I write with a pen and paper.
Mhm.
Some ideas of what might happen. I sketch a little bit, and then when I have an idea, then I can go into the studio and try to work it together. Some I've made pieces. There was a song once that I made a dance number to, and it was inspired just by the song. I've had a sketch or two come from a dream.
Well, it seems like a lot. You're very open to stimuli. I mean, you're very, I don't, maybe impulsive is not a good word to use, but it sounds like you react kinetically to what's around you once you've cleared your space.
Mhm.
And that's creativity. I mean, you're very, it's not, it seems like you're born to do this. You just are natural,
Yeah,
your ingredients in your mind and body cause things to happen. If you,
that's apparently the case that I was
and you
born with.
react. I mean, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
What
Do
before we go on to maybe your later career or some other thoughts, what would have been your favorite things to do, like in those periods, like for example in the Harvard Square or opening for a rock and roll band or these quick, I call them quick hitters, like it's
Quick
not
what?
long form mime as like, in a sense, but what did you really
sketches?
like to do? What was your signature back in those days, those early days that gave you pleasure and the audience pleasure?
Oh well, when I was playing on the streets and opening for the rock bands, well, that's a good example. So my friend John said, "Come down to this nightclub. I want you to open for me." And at that point, I had done nothing but perform for kids at schools and on the street. And I thought, oh, what am I going to do for a group of young drunk adults at a nightclub? So I thought, okay, it's got to involve marijuana, and I've got to do something. I've got to do the mime in the box because that's the best illusion going.
Yeah.
So I created this sketch where I get high and I start blowing smoke rings. I put my finger through one of the smoke rings and it's solid. And I manipulate it and I stick my head through it and I climb in and I'm in the box.
Uh-huh.
And the box shrinks and I break out and I pick up the box and it shrinks and it shrinks and it shrinks and it shrinks. And take the last hit.
Yeah, it
So,
goes in the head.
so,
Yeah.
so I called it disjointed. And,
So you are
and
responding to the time. You are responding to your environment beautifully. I mean, that's the culture of the time, and you really were able to pinpoint and capture, what the pleasure of or the attention of the people of that time. The
it
kids.
was it was right it was right for the late 70s.
Yeah,
At some point in the early 80s, I had to ditch it.
Trent, I know that James says you have spent your whole career doing mime, and has anybody ever asked you, or have you ever considered the question, why? Why mime? Why is it that you chose to
yeah,
pursue?
yeah. Good question.
You have do you have a defense of the art form, or do you have like a mime manifesto?
you guys, you guys ask the craziest questions. Um, if I could, I'd be a stand-up comedian
Really?
Mhm.
or a jazz musician,
Mhm.
but I don't have those skills. I mean, I actually went to UCLA thinking I was going to be a doctor
Mm.
and dropped out because I didn't want to be there. And I was kind of an artist looking for an art form, I guess. And when I discovered I had seen Marceau as a kid on the Ed Sullivan Show in the 1950s and loved it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until, like you too, James, but it wasn't until I saw Claude Saint Denis that I thought, this is a guy and he's making a living doing this. This is pretty cool. I started fooling around with it, and I had a knack for it. Like I had my isolations were easy for me, and my intuitive sense of basic physics, the counterweight and forces and stuff the illusions came really easily for me.
Yeah.
So it was easy for me to look impressive to people early on, and I had a lot of success early on.
And how this is interesting because you're mirroring a lot of my background, and then there's this shift into the more autobiographical, the more verbal, the more maybe esoteric. Like that's something you think that I don't want to say aging artist, but a maturing artist will gradually go toward, do you think? I mean, like in your case, why did you feel you had more stories to tell that you didn't need to fit you didn't need to fit in the box anymore, but you could translate into other form of presentation?
Um, I'm sorry, I didn't entirely understand that
Well, I was
question.
going to say, did you feel like, okay, you're talking to us about the joint in the box, all that stuff, which attracted you, which attracts people when you're younger. But when you get older, what is it that shifts in an older artist that wants them to branch out and to maybe speak more from the heart? In your case, well, how did that happen?
I don't know. I don't know. I think it's just a natural maturation process. The stuff I was interested, I wanted to do something new and different, and
Yeah, yeah.
the stuff that I'm interested in or think about or whatever is just something that an older person would think about. Tony Monaro said something to me once about when he was at DeCruz school. He said, DeCruz, these people coming back from DeCruz school and they're doing all this abstract corporeal stuff. He said, when I was at DeCruz, we were doing comedy. We were doing pickpockets and falling on your face, and and someone else said to me, I can't quite place it, but
Too many joints and boxes. And I don't know, making a joke. Go ahead.
That's okay. I think that DeCruz, as he got older, got more interested in doing work that was beautiful and abstract.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just kind of a natural process. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think maybe
so.
sometimes when when we're young, it's about laughter or entertainment, and then we want to find a little bit more depth to our art. I think that's a natural process because you've experienced more things in your life. I mean, It's not necessarily that everybody goes through that, but
I mean, one of our questions is, one of the questions we haven't asked is how the aging artist adapts, especially a physical artist.
Right.
I think this idea we're talking about of the new ideas and new ways of performing, I think that goes along with that there's a adaptation or a introspection that you're not even aware of when you're younger. And possibly the aging process brings you to that place. What about practically speaking, though? Like, how do you take care of your body? How have you been able to be as agile? I mean, we're not as agile as we were, right? But how have you been able to feel satisfied with your physical presence over the years?
I just use denial. I work a little bit to stay in shape. I mean, I have to work out pretty much every day a bit, and
when you say work out, do you mean what do you mean, like going to the gym or like running?
No, I don't. No, I don't do that.
Or your own mime system? Like, what do you mean work out?
Yeah, I do some strength exercises and some stretching,
Yeah.
basically. That that I picked up along the way, either from dance or from physiotherapists or whatever. Just kind of deal with what I need to do to stay in shape, to keep my body working properly. My shows. I used to do a handstand into a plank position in my show. I used to do the splits in my show. I could, I don't do anything like that now. I used to. It's funny. When I first started performing, I would come off stage drenched in sweat, and at this point, I come off stage oftentimes fresh.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think that happens with most, mature artists, is they find a way to economize. They get to the point, and so this idea of effort is less. It's more about fluidity and finding the cracks in the wall rather than trying to beat the wall down. It's spending all that time beating. Where the crack is right at the beginning. Have you had any like disastrous injuries that you've had to take care of in the last few years? Or not? Maybe not disastrous, but
yeah. Well, I came down with gout when I was about 50, and I actually had, yeah. You know what gout is?
Yeah, it's very painful.
Yeah, it's very painful. It's like you can't walk painful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's worse than that.
Yeah.
And I had to cancel an engagement, and I think maybe the only time I've ever canceled an engagement.
Wow.
So there was that. I've dealt with that.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me now.
Do you see an end to your work? I mean, is there a place where you're going to retire? Or is there always a way to adapt, and as long as the spark is there and the passion for the performance?
I really enjoy performing. I also enjoy making a little cash from performing.
Yeah.
So I don't really want to retire. I kind of figure that there will come a time that I won't be able to do it. I asked my performing partner, Mr. Fish of the Super Scientific Circus, about that. And I said, when are we going to have to retire? And he said, when we can no longer pick up these 50-pound suitcases.
If you can't carry your props, then maybe it's time to.
Yeah, I mean, there comes a point, but I also do some directing with kids. I think maybe we talked about that, and I figure I can do that into the grave.
Right.
I can do that post-mortem.
When are those performances? That's very interesting to me because I've worked a lot with kids too, and I find it very, very satisfying. But do the shows come out of teaching that you do? Do you do like a workshop, or is it specifically hired to direct a show? And also, are you creating a brand new show for each one, or is it something that's already written?
It's a brand new show for each one.
Wow, yeah.
And I've done shows. I adapted A Christmas Carol with Scrooge as a corporate polluter, and I did Twelfth Night. I did a 1-hour adaptation of Twelfth Night with 5th and 6th graders in the Shakespearean language, which was pretty amazing. I've done. I picked up at least one show from The Fringe, a one-man show that I adapted for 15 kids, from a Fringe artist. Maybe the most interesting show that I've done, I did last year, was a group of high school kids. It was a small school. I had 7 kids, and they each chose a historical figure or a significant person. And we called it What's the Big Idea? Because in BC they have this concept of big ideas in curriculum. So my original idea was to have them develop monologues, and I'd figure out some way of putting them in a game show or something to have them present. We had Stephen King, Oscar Wilde, Marilyn Monroe, Sappho, the Greek poet, a couple of other characters, and I created a scenario. The kids worked on scenes, and they began working with each other to create these scenes. I created a scenario where Stephen King's granddaughter says to him, "Grandpa, how come your work isn't funnier?" And he says, "Well, I don't know. It's not what I do." He said, "You should be funnier." He says, "How do I do that?" She says, "Well, why don't you talk to Oscar Wilde?" He says, "Well, that could be difficult. Isn't he dead?" And she says, "There's an app for that." So
Yeah,
So he,
Stephen,
yeah, working with kids. So here's a two-part question. So where would a young person go? Where would you advise a young person to go to learn the craft of the art of mime today? And also, what's your feeling on the state of the art form today? Like, is it worthwhile for a kid to go study physical theater, mime, and the different styles, Um, what's going on there? Where does a young person go? You know, like both of us had very little theater training before we started on our, journey as a mime, right?
yeah.
And and then is it worth it? Like, what's the state of mime today versus what it was like 30, 40 years ago? What do you think about all that?
Well, I, you know, you and I were both mime stars in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah,
And then mine basically died in 1990. At least that was the year it happened to me.
that's true. Yeah,
I think there was a recession going on, but in like 87 or 88, comedians started making fun of mimes on national television.
yeah.
And all of a sudden, I couldn't get in. I woke up one morning and my calendar looked like Walden Pond in January. It was just empty and white. So, yeah, I've basically been hobbling along since then. I mean, that's not quite accurate. I've done pretty well. I stopped playing colleges. I put together a kids show. I, this is kind of funny. In 1990, I was considering a new career. So being visually oriented, I took some video production classes and I took some graphic arts classes. I ended up making such a good brochure and video for myself that it boosted my career, and I continued on.
Yeah, it's funny because the mind
that's
brain
great.
is the cinematic brain. I mean, the mind brain is cinematic and it is visual in that way.
For sure, for
So you
sure.
got inspired and you continued.
I continued, and in the 1990s, something happened where all of a sudden theaters were interested in children's programming.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of work for family and children's groups in theaters. I came to British Columbia and did a showcase here, and I booked 150 shows out of one showcase,
Yeah.
which was phenomenal. And I started working with my partner, John Lepyars. We put together a show called Funny Stuff. Funny Stuff was a clown and mime routine, and this is a poster. Let's get rid of
There's,
this. This
yeah,
is a poster
there's,
from the Funny Stuff Circus in Taiwan.
ah,
We toured
yeah.
this in Taiwan, and then John said, "Well, why don't we put together a science show?" So we adapted the show, and we made the Super Scientific Circus, and we have toured this all over the U.S. to large 1,000, 2,000 seat auditoriums. Kids pay an admission; they get bussed in from the schools. And that's been a very successful show for us. Super Scientific Circus is actually the longest continuously running live science show in the country.
Yeah.
So
And
you would say
your
it was
partnership with John is really good. I mean, you have a really good rapport with each other. There's just a little bit of a video of you doing funny stuff that's absolutely beautiful with the
Uh-huh.
clown and the mime together. I just
Uh-huh.
thought
Uh-huh.
that was fantastic.
so
Thanks.
you would say this work is really worthwhile. I mean, it's maybe more so than your early work because it's really providing education and informing and so forth the younger generation. The arts are important for the survival of society, of course. So do you feel that the skills you've nurtured over 40 years, 50 years, there's a place for them in today's world as as an example of what you're doing now with these shows, correct?
Well, for sure. I mean, it's great. Performing is great for kids because for obvious reasons. I mean, people need to be able to communicate. They need to be able to get up in front of other people. They need to be able to sell their message, or it's obvious why it's good.
Well, it's obvious to us, Trent, but it's not necessarily obvious to the people that are
For the purse
promoting the
strings.
arts or in the schools. So I mean, it's fantastic that you're still doing that.
So
Yeah.
where would you?
You didn't finish your thought. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Um, well, I think that a couple of thoughts here about, I have students, and when people, what I say to kids, what I say to people is, do not go into this work unless it's the only thing that will make you happy,
Mm-hmm.
because it's too hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
Very
There
hard.
are there are much easier ways to make not very much money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But if it's the only thing that will make you happy, then God bless you and Godspeed, because this is what you will do.
Yeah.
And it's a great. I don't know. I've had a great career. I mean, there have been awful moments, but mostly I've loved it, and I feel privileged to have been able to do it. And I've met lots of wonderful people, been to wonderful places, and there's really nothing for me. There's nothing better than being on stage and being able to make an audience burst out in laughter.
Yeah, yeah. So you are a stand-up comedian in a way. I mean, it's just
Oh, I'm a funny performer for sure.
yeah, but I mean, you're probably more skilled than a lot of stand-ups, just because your toolbox is bigger, and you're more immersed in a performing art. Yeah, so do you think mime will ever return? Like you said, we were stars in the 70s and 80s. You think there will ever be a place for the mime as another noted kind of accepted mainstream art form, or well, is it just things are going on to another dimension? What do you think?
Well, I think my partner John studied with Lecoq, Jacques Lecoq, and he said that Lecoq said that mime is an art form of transition. And I said, well, what did that mean? And he said, well, that it will be popular for a decade or two, and then it fades out, and you don't see it for another 20 or 30 or 40 years. And and it was at 1850s or something that Devereaux was hugely famous in Paris, and then it wasn't again until the early 50s that Marcel Marceau appeared and mesmerized the world with his work. So, I don't know that mime is ever coming back in the form that
Right.
Marceau did it, but someone will figure out how to use the mime technique and add something to it or make it different in such a way that it captivates people.
What is that thing that does captivate people? The thing that translates through the decades? I mean, can you pinpoint any element of the mime art that, no matter what the culture is, the present culture or the popularity of certain presentations, what is it in mime that is a foundation of truth, so to speak? What works? What does mime provide that other art forms don't, that will transcend time? Do you have any idea about that?
Um, no. I wish I knew. I don't know. I told you I saw Robert Shields in Reno and he did a show and he was talking to me. He said, well, you need an angle. You need to do something different. Maybe you could do green face.
Yeah.
Right?
One of his favorite things is you got to kill it. You got to kill it. Get out there and kill it.
Well, it's funny because Blue Man Group came along with Blue Body, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very interesting. And Moominchance came along with all the full body mask stuff.
I feel it has something to do with transformation. Like, acting teachers always talk about transformation and so forth. But I think the true value of mime is it allows for a magical transformation of time and space that other forms can't do so easily in such a simple way. It's really magic when it's done well.
But I think it's also the fact that it depends so much on the audience's intellectual and emotional involvement, that they connect to the artist and they're creating things in their own imagination with the help of the artist that's performing. So it's not passive. It's like the audience needs to connect with the really good artists. They connect and they are living it too. And not all art forms are like that. Some art forms are purely passive, that you watch the film or whatever.
Right, or you listen to the music, or
Yeah,
even a lot of theater is pretty easy to watch because everything is there. You got a set and costumes and props and
yeah,
sketches and
yeah. The mime and to a certain extent, live theater now requires a lot of concentration and a lot of people don't want to devote their time to. And in this phase of history,
You are
you
always
got to
so
really
negative
watch and
about it.
really.
James, you're so negative. It's like it's true that a lot of people
Oh,
might feel lazy about it, but I think they need it. I think
no,
that
no, no. You're
it'll
misinterpreting
always
me.
need that.
No,
Need
I
to have
didn't.
live theater.
You're misunderstanding me. I'm saying that there's that's the magic of mime that it can provide that transformational quality.
Yes, I agree.
It's not negative. Here's a question: do you think a student should study with a group of people or go to one school for a while, like go to Lecoq School 4 times over, or should they take this workshop here, that workshop there? What do you feel about this idea of accumulating knowledge to go on your path?
well, I kind of wish I'd stayed in college and studied theater. It's just that
Uh,
my family wouldn't have supported that, and really I wouldn't have support. I didn't think I had that kind of talent. And it wasn't until I discovered that I had a knack for mime that I thought, yeah, I could do this. So, but at this point, I kind of wished I'd gotten a degree. I wished I'd studied theater. I'd be a lot better if I had.
but you're living your career. You've been doing theater for. I mean,
Yeah,
you are an example of you are theater,
you're
which is just an interesting take on how one prepares to do what we do. It's but you're a great example of the raw ingredients and what it's built.
To answer your previous question about what should you do, John Lepiars, my partner, said this interesting about Lecoq. He said after they finished the 2-year program at Lecoq School, Lecoq said, "Don't take another class. Don't go to another school. Don't find another teacher. You have everything you need. Go out there and work.
Yeah,
Go out there and create and do the work."
there's a lot of truth in there.
Yeah.
You feel that? I mean, where do you want to go from here? Let's say 10 years from now, when you're 150, like what do you think is gonna happen then?
With what?
Yeah, just where you want to go. What's your
Well,
what,
I want to
arc,
keep doing.
what do you think your arc is going to go to? I mean, what like right now, I feel personally that I have a responsibility to impart knowledge.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I've always been a teacher, but I always feel, especially now, even when I'm tired, fatigued, and impatient, I still feel that I have a responsibility to pass down my information. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
one of the things I'm interested in, as well as finding new vistas as a old mine. Like whatever they're gonna take.
Right.
So what about you? What do you think?
I have absolutely no ideas.
Yeah,
I have no idea about doing any kind of new work for myself.
uh,
I kind of think maybe it'll come or maybe it won't. I'm not too concerned about it. I still enjoy performing. I still am performing, but I've completely stopped hustling. Well, not completely, but I'm not making phone calls. I'm not sending out
yeah,
brochures. I just take the work that comes in. Having said that, I really am enjoying the shows that I direct
yeah,
because I like working with the kids and I like every show is unique. It forces me to do something new. So I've got to find a play or come up with a concept. And it's great working with other people. And there's several things about it that's great. One of them is that you work with kids. You work with students who are better than you are. Like I had a student who was she was delivering these lines, and as I said, I'm not really that good of an actor. My approach to acting is sort of serial emotions. Like I'm angry, and then I'm regretful, and then I'm sad, and then. And so this young woman was doing her line, and I almost stopped her, and then I thought, wait a minute, she's doing 2 or 3 emotions simultaneously. Cripes, she's better than I am. I'm just going to shut up and let her fly. So you end up being able to do things that you can envision that you yourself couldn't do, but you
Mm-hmm.
now can because you have talented students or you have multiple bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The other thing that's great about it is you have the pleasure of being in the audience and watching it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like you get to enjoy the show with the audience and be proud of the students. And I found that to be just as fulfilling and exciting as actually getting on stage and doing it myself. I never would have guessed that would be the case.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
so interesting. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's very good. And it's
yeah.
probably um really, really wonderful for them too to have a mentor and a teacher like you or directing them.
So, some of my students adore me. Some of them don't.
Are you a hard teacher? Do you push people?
Yes, I mean I've gotten gentler, and I've come to the realization that I'm very product oriented,
Mm-hmm.
and in education you really want to be much more process oriented.
Mm-hmm.
I will never not be product oriented, but I've come to realize that the most important thing that I can give to my students is to nurture their self acceptance and self esteem,
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
help bring them out of themselves, to help them discover these unknown talents. I've had kids who've never been on stage before, and have this natural gift for performing, and it just blows me away. I mean, you get this 12-year-old kid, and they're just like brilliant, and you're just thinking, in 24 years, this kid's going to be on Broadway or something. I mean,
Or maybe that talent is going to take them and wherever they go in their career. I mean, that sort
sure,
of belief in themselves and their ability to express themselves that they learn through theater and mime and other art forms, that is a useful tool for other things in their life, even if they don't become a performer.
Yeah, it's the
sure.
spirit of you're seeing the spirit of the human soul. Here's a question. So if you could talk to yourself as a 22, 24-year-old, like now, you, Trent, now, if you saw your 24-year-old self just starting out as a mime, I'm assuming you were 24, right? 23, 24, 21, 22.
I was.
What would you say to I mean, not that this is going to happen to you, but what kind of advice would you give your younger self now, looking back?
First of all, I would say show up to your gigs on time. I would say remain humble. I would say take every opportunity you can. If you get offered a show, don't not do it because it's inconvenient, or because it doesn't pay enough, or because it's too far a drive, or because you're going to have to stay up late. I would say suck it up and do every show you can possibly do. I would say try to continue to find teachers that know things that you don't,
Mm-hmm.
and look for opportunities to collaborate with other artists,
Yeah,
because you will learn from them.
that's great advice. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I think
Yeah,
that is a really good way to end our show, with that advice to your younger self.
I agree.
Thank
I
you so
agree.
much for being a part of the Mime Radio Show, Trent. It's been a wonderful conversation.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I feel like I'm now in the Mime Hall of Fame.
You are.
So I think I could probably retire now.
Thanks a lot, Trent.
You're welcome,
Okay, ladies
James.
and gentlemen, what episode is this, Karen? Is this episode what?
I don't
30?
know. It's almost 40, I think.
What's
Maybe
40?
39. I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
So thanks, Trent, and we'll see everyone for the next episode next month. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Mime Radio Show podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe.